Hello, I'm Adrian Vale, and for the past 30 years I've been wandering through cities and deserts, libraries and marketplaces, asking one persistent question: what does it mean to live well? Today I want to talk about a philosopher who gets spectacularly misunderstood. His name was Epicurus, and he lived in Athens around 300 BCE. When most people hear Epicurean, they think of lavish feasts, expensive wines, sensual excess. Ironically, Epicurus ate mostly bread, olives, and the occasional bit of cheese. He lived in a garden with his friends, discussing philosophy and cultivating what he called Ataraxia, a word we'll explore deeply today. The misunderstanding isn't just historical trivia. It reveals something crucial about how we pursue happiness in our own lives. We confuse pleasure with enjoyment, intensity with satisfaction, stimulation with peace. And in that confusion, we often make ourselves miserable while chasing what we think will make us happy. So let me ask you, when was the last time you felt truly content? Not excited, not entertained, not distracted, but genuinely at peace? If you're struggling to answer, you're not alone, and Epicurus might have something valuable to teach us. Epicurus founded his school in a garden, literally a kapos, outside Athens. Above the entrance, he supposedly inscribed, "Stranger, here you will do well to tarry. Here our highest good is pleasure." But that word pleasure, hedon in Greek, is where the trouble begins. The Stoics, Epicurus's philosophical rivals, accused him of promoting debauchery. Early Christians painted him as a hedonist, leading people away from virtue. Even today, Epicurean in common usage suggests someone devoted to gourmet food and sensory indulgence. But here's what Epicurus actually wrote, and I'm paraphrasing from his letter to Menuisius. When we say that pleasure is the goal, we do not mean the pleasures of the profligate or the pleasures of consumption, as some believe, but rather freedom from pain in the body and disturbance in the soul. Notice that. Freedom from, not pleasure of. This is the first crucial distinction. Epicurus divided pleasures into categories. There are kinetic pleasures, the active satisfaction of a desire, the taste of food when you're hungry, the relief of drinking when you're thirsty, the pleasure of sex, of entertainment, of acquiring something you've wanted. Then there are katastematic pleasures, the stable state of having no pain, no want, no disturbance, the quiet satisfaction of a body that isn't hungry, a mind that isn't anxious, a heart that isn't lonely. Most of us spend our lives chasing kinetic pleasures. We're always reaching for the next thing, the next experience, the next achievement. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But Epicurus noticed something. Kinetic pleasures are temporary. They arise, peak, and fade. And often they leave us wanting more, or wanting something different, or feeling vaguely empty once they're gone. Katastematic pleasure, what we might call contentment or peace, is different. It's not intense, but it's sustainable. It doesn't demand constant renewal. It's the difference between the thrill of buying something new and the quiet satisfaction of having enough. The Greek word ataraxia literally means without disturbance. It's often translated as tranquility or equanimity, but I think the best translation might be unshakeability. Imagine your mind as a body of water. Kinetic pleasures are like throwing stones into that water. They create ripples, waves, excitement. Each stone is a new experience, a new desire satisfied. The water moves, splashes, catches the light. It's dynamic, stimulating. But ataraxia is like that water when it's perfectly still. Not frozen, still alive, still responsive, but undisturbed. And in that stillness, you can see clearly all the way to the bottom. You can see reality as it is, without the distortions of craving or fear. Epicurus believed this state was the highest form of pleasure, not because it's exciting, but because it's complete. When you're in ataraxia, you're not lacking anything. You're not waiting for the next thing to make you happy. You're not afraid of losing what you have. You simply are, and that's enough. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like giving up, like settling, like resigning yourself to a boring, passionless existence. But that's not what Epicurus meant at all. Think about it this way. Have you ever been so anxious about an upcoming event that you couldn't enjoy the present moment? Or so obsessed with acquiring something that the pursuit itself became exhausting? Or so afraid of losing something that you couldn't fully appreciate having it? That's disturbance. That's the opposite of ataraxia. And it doesn't make you more alive. It makes you less present, less capable of genuine enjoyment, less free. Ataraxia isn't about eliminating all feeling or desire. It's about eliminating the disturbances that prevent you from experiencing life clearly. It's about distinguishing between desires that lead to peace and desires that lead to endless craving. Epicurus divided desires into 3 categories. First, natural and necessary desires. Food when hungry, shelter from cold, safety from harm. These should be satisfied simply and without anxiety. Second, natural but unnecessary desires. Gourmet food instead of simple food. A luxurious house instead of adequate shelter. These can be enjoyed if they're easily available, but pursuing them obsessively creates disturbance. Third, unnatural and unnecessary desires. Fame, wealth beyond need, power over others, immortality. These, Epicurus argued, can never truly be satisfied. They're based on false beliefs about what makes life good, and pursuing them guarantees unhappiness. The path to ataraxia, then, is learning to satisfy the first category simply, enjoy the second category lightly, and recognize the third category as illusions. But here's where Epicurus gets really interesting. He didn't just distinguish between types of pleasures. He created what we might call a hierarchy of goods. And at the top of that hierarchy, surprisingly, wasn't pleasure at all in the way we usually think of it. It was friendship. Epicurus wrote, "Of all the things that wisdom provides for the happiness of the whole life, by far the most important is friendship. Not wealth, not health, not even freedom from pain. Friendship." Why? Because friendship addresses something fundamental about human existence. We are, whether we like it or not, social creatures. Our deepest fears and our deepest joys are relational. The fear of being alone, misunderstood, unloved. The joy of being seen, accepted, connected. In Epicurus's garden, friends lived together, shared meals, discussed philosophy, supported each other through difficulties. This wasn't just pleasant, it was the foundation of the good life. Because friendship provides something that no amount of individual pleasure can provide. The security of being known and valued for who you are. Think about your happiest memories. I'm willing to bet that most of them involve other people. Not just being around people, but genuine connection. Laughter shared, struggles overcome together, quiet moments of mutual understanding. Now think about your most intense pleasures. Maybe a delicious meal, a beautiful sunset, a moment of physical pleasure. Beautiful, yes, but do they compare to the deep satisfaction of being truly known by another person, of having someone you can call at 3 in the morning, of laughing until your sides hurt with someone who gets your particular sense of humor? Epicurus understood that the highest pleasures aren't individual at all. They're relational. And they're not intense. They're deep. They don't peak and fade. They accumulate and deepen over time. This is why he distinguished between hedon, pleasure, and what we might call eudaimonia, flourishing or deep happiness. Pleasure is what you feel, flourishing is what you are, and you can't flourish alone. But here's the paradox: friendship, real friendship, requires vulnerability. It requires showing yourself as you are, not as you wish to be seen. It requires accepting others as they are, with all their flaws and limitations. It requires time, attention, patience, forgiveness. In other words, friendship requires exactly the kind of effort that our pleasure-seeking culture often tells us to avoid. We're told to optimize, to maximize, to keep our options open. But friendship demands commitment. It demands presence. It demands that we sometimes put someone else's needs above our own immediate desires. And yet, Epicurus insisted, this is where true happiness lies. Not in the freedom to pursue every pleasure, but in the security of deep connection. Not in the excitement of novelty, but in the comfort of being known. So what does all this mean for us, living 2,300 years after Epicurus? How do we distinguish pleasure from enjoyment, disturbance from peace, in a world that's constantly trying to sell us the next experience, the next upgrade, the next thing that will finally make us happy? Let me offer some practical observations drawn from Epicurus but filtered through my own years of wandering and wondering. First, pay attention to what happens after the pleasure fades. When you buy something new, how long does the satisfaction last? When you scroll through social media, how do you feel afterward? When you pursue a particular experience, does it leave you more content or more restless? Epicurus would say, pleasures that lead to greater peace are worth pursuing. Pleasures that lead to greater disturbance, more craving, more anxiety, more dissatisfaction, are traps, no matter how intense they feel in the moment. Second, cultivate simple pleasures that don't depend on circumstances beyond your control. Epicurus loved bread, olives, and conversation, not because he couldn't afford more, but because these pleasures were reliable, sustainable, and sufficient. They didn't require wealth, status, or perfect conditions. What are your equivalents? Maybe it's a morning cup of coffee, a walk in your neighborhood, a book that makes you think. These aren't impressive pleasures. You can't post them on Instagram and get hundreds of likes, but they're yours, they're available, and they're enough. Third, invest in relationships, not experiences. Our culture tells us to collect experiences, travel, adventure, novelty, and there's value in that. But Epicurus would ask, are you experiencing these things with people you care about? Are you building memories that will deepen your connections? Or are you just accumulating stories to tell, photos to post, items to check off a list? The difference matters, because experiences fade, but relationships compound. Every shared experience, every conversation, every moment of support or laughter adds to a foundation that becomes more valuable over time. Fourth, practice what Epicurus called sober reasoning. Before pursuing a desire, ask yourself, is this natural and necessary? Natural but unnecessary, or unnatural and unnecessary? Will satisfying this desire bring me closer to ataraxia, or will it create new disturbances? This isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about being honest about what actually makes you happy versus what you've been told should make you happy. And finally, create your own garden. Epicurus's garden wasn't just a physical space, it was a community of people committed to living well together. You don't need to start a philosophical commune, but you do need to create spaces in your life for depth, for connection, for the kind of conversations and relationships that matter. Maybe it's a weekly dinner with friends. Maybe it's a book club, a hiking group, a regular coffee date with someone you trust. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that you're intentionally creating space for the things that Epicurus identified as most important: friendship, philosophy, and peace. I've spent a lot of my life chasing things I thought would make me happy. In my 30s, I pursued academic success, publications, conferences, recognition. In my 40s, I traveled obsessively, as if the next destination would finally be the one that satisfied whatever I was looking for. And don't get me wrong, I don't regret those pursuits. They taught me things. They gave me stories. They shaped who I am. But the moments I remember most clearly, the moments that still warm me when I think about them, aren't the achievements or the exotic locations. They're quieter. A conversation with a friend that lasted until dawn. Sitting in silence with my daughter, watching the sunset. A letter from someone I'd lost touch with, saying that something I'd written had helped them through a difficult time. These weren't intense pleasures, they weren't Instagram-worthy. But they were complete, they were enough. They were, in Epicurus's terms, ataraxia. I think our culture has forgotten how to value this kind of happiness. We've become addicted to intensity, to novelty, to the next thing. We've confused stimulation with satisfaction, excitement with joy, pleasure with peace. And the cost is enormous. We're more anxious, more depressed, more lonely than ever before. We have more ways to pursue pleasure than any generation in history, and yet we're not happier. If anything, we're more restless, more dissatisfied, more disturbed. Epicurus would say that's because we're pursuing the wrong things. We're chasing kinetic pleasures that can never truly satisfy. We're neglecting the katastematic pleasures that actually sustain us. We're avoiding the vulnerability of real friendship in favor of the safety of superficial connections. And we're paying the price in our souls. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. The path to ataraxia isn't complicated. It doesn't require wealth, status, or perfect circumstances. It requires only that we learn to distinguish between what genuinely nourishes us and what merely stimulates us, between what brings peace and what brings disturbance, between pleasure and true enjoyment. It requires that we value depth over intensity, connection over novelty, presence over achievement. It requires that we cultivate friendships, not just networks, that we seek understanding, not just information, that we create spaces for silence, reflection, and genuine conversation. It requires, in short, that we live more like Epicurus in his garden, simply, thoughtfully, together. So let me leave you with this question, the same question I ask myself regularly. What are you pursuing and why? What do you think will make you happy? And more importantly, What actually does? Because here's what I've learned. After 30 years of wandering and wondering, happiness isn't something you achieve or acquire. It's not a destination you reach or a state you attain once and for all. It's more like a skill you develop, a practice you cultivate, a way of being you choose again and again. And that choice begins with distinguishing pleasure from enjoyment, disturbance from peace, the things that stimulate from the things that satisfy. Epicurus made that choice in his garden 2,300 years ago. He chose friendship over fame, simplicity over luxury, peace over excitement. And by all accounts, he was happy, genuinely, deeply, sustainably happy. Not because his life was perfect, not because he had everything he wanted, but because he understood what actually mattered, and he organized his life around it. We can do the same. We can create our own gardens, cultivate our own friendships, pursue our own ataraxia. We can learn to distinguish between the pleasures that disturb us and the pleasures that complete us. It won't be easy. Our entire culture pushes in the opposite direction. But it's possible. And it's worth it. Because in the end, the question isn't whether you've had intense experiences or impressive achievements. The question is, are you at peace? Are you connected? Are you, in the deepest sense, content? If not, maybe it's time to listen to an old philosopher in a garden who understood something we've forgotten, that the highest pleasure isn't intensity, but peace, not excitement, but contentment, not more, but enough. Thank you for listening. I'm Adrian Vale, and I'll see you next time.